Dr. Marcus Chun had seen many strange things during his 15 years aboard the medical frigate Hippocrates, but nothing quite like this. The alien vessel that had crash-landed on Kepler 442b was unlike anything in the galactic database. Its hull shimmered with an opalescent sheen that seemed to shift colors based on the angle of observation, and the geometric patterns etched into its surface hurt to look at directly. "Biosigns are weak but present," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim, her scanner beeping frantically. "Whatever's in there is dying fast." Marcus adjusted his medical kit and approached the wreckage. The ship's emergency beacon had been broadcasting on an unknown frequency for 3 hours before the Universal Translator had finally cracked its basic distress protocols. The message was simple: medical emergency, royal passenger, immediate assistance required. The airlock had been blown open from the inside, suggesting the occupant had tried to escape. Marcus activated his helmet's enhanced vision and peered into the darkened corridor. Bioluminescent strips along the walls flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows that danced like living things. "I'm going in," he announced, ignoring the protests from his team. As Chief Medical Officer? Marcus had pulled rank, but more importantly, he couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was inside didn't have much time left. The ship's interior was a maze of curved corridors that seemed to follow no logical architectural pattern. The walls felt warm to the touch, almost organic. After several wrong turns, Marcus finally located what appeared to be the main cabin. The door had sealed itself shut, but his plasma cutter made quick work of the exotic metal dot inside. He found her. The alien princess lay crumpled against a crystalline console, her body convulsing weakly. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin held a faint blue luminescence, and intricate silver markings covered her arms and face like living tattoos. Her hair was white as starlight and seemed to move with its own ethereal breeze. Most striking were her eyes, completely silver, like mirrors reflecting the cosmos itself, but it was the wound that caught Marcus's attention. A jagged piece of the console had pierced her side, and something that might have been blood was pooling beneath her. The liquid was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It sparkled with tiny lights. Like liquid starlight, Marcus knelt beside her and activated his medical scanner. The read-ins were chaotic. Her biology was completely alien, but the trauma patterns were universal. She was bleeding out and fast. The princess's eyes fluttered open as he approached. She spoke in a melodic language that his translator couldn't process, but the urgency in her voice was unmistakable. She was trying to tell him something important. "Easy," Marcus said softly, switching his translator to basic empathy mode. "I'm here to help." She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Her silver eyes locked onto his, and suddenly Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if someone was speaking directly into his mind. Images flashed before him, a world of crystal spires and floating cities. Massive fleets of ships engaged in brutal warfare. And always the same face, hers, standing before crowds of adoring people. The mental connection broke as she collapsed back against the console. Her breathing was becoming more labored, and the luminescent markings on her skin were starting to fade. Marcus ran every scan he could think of. Her physiology was based on a copper-platinum hybrid circulatory system instead of iron-based hemoglobin. Her organs were arranged differently, and her nervous system seemed to be partially crystalline. Most frustrating of all, none of his medical supplies seemed compatible with her biology. "This is Chun to Hippocrates," he spoke into his communicator. "I need an immediate analysis of this biodata. We have a critical patient with completely unknown physiology." Dr. Sarah Martinez's voice crackled back through the comm. "Marcus, I'm looking at your readings. This is incredible. Her blood chemistry is unlike anything we've cataloged. But there's a problem. She's lost too much of her circulatory fluid. Even if we understood her biology perfectly, I don't think we have anything that could serve as a compatible replacement." Marcus stared down at the dying princess. Her silver markings were almost completely dark now, and her breathing was becoming increasingly shallow. In desperation, he ran a comparative analysis between her blood and human blood. The results made him pause. While the base chemistry was completely different, there were some surprising similarities in the protein structures. Her circulatory system seemed to be remarkably adaptable, almost as if it was designed to interface with other biological systems. "Martinez," he called back. "What if we tried a direct human-to-alien transfusion?" The protein binding sites looked compatible. There was a long pause. "Marcus, that's insane. We have no idea what that could do to either of you. Her blood could be toxic to humans or yours to her. You could both die." Marcus looked down at the princess again. She was clearly young, probably no older than 20 in human equivalent years. Her people had reached out for help, had trusted strangers enough to broadcast their distress signal. How could he let her die without trying everything possible? "Run the compatibility protocols anyway," he ordered. "Full spectrum analysis?" While Martinez worked on the analysis, Marcus tried to make the princess more comfortable. Her ship's medical bay was clearly advanced, but without understanding the controls, he couldn't risk using any of the alien equipment. The princess's eyes opened again, and once more he felt that strange mental connection. This time the images were clearer. He saw her world under siege, massive ships bombarding crystal cities while desperate people fled in anything that could fly. He saw her being hustled aboard this ship by what appeared to be guards or servants, their faces grim with determination. But then the images changed. He saw Earth, his own world, from a perspective he'd never experienced. He saw human colonies, human ships, human faces. The princess was showing him something about humanity, something important. The connection broke as Martinez's voice came through the communicator. "Marcus, I can't believe what I'm seeing. The compatibility is actually higher than I would have expected. There's about a 60% chance that human blood could serve as a temporary substitute for hers. But the risks, double quote, what about the risks to her?" Marcus interrupted. "Honestly, it might save her life. But Marcus, we're talking about a direct transfusion. If something goes wrong, if her system rejects the blood or has an adverse reaction." Marcus was already rolling up his sleeve. "Prep the portable transfusion kit. I'm doing this." As he prepared the equipment, the princess watched him with those strange silver eyes. For a moment he thought he saw something like gratitude in their depths, but it might have been his imagination. What wasn't imagination was the fact that she was dying, and he was the only one who could help her. The decision had been made. The portable transfusion kit hummed to life as Marcus connected the tubes to his arm and then to the princess. Her skin was cool to the touch, almost like touching polished stone, but he could feel a faint pulse beneath the surface. The equipment confirmed what his eyes already told him. She was minutes away from complete circulatory collapse. "Beginning transfusion now," he reported to the Hippocrates. "Monitor both our vital signs closely." As his blood began to flow into her system, Marcus felt an immediate dizziness. Not from blood loss. He'd donated before and knew that sensation. This was different, almost like a mild electrical current running through his body. The princess's eyes snapped open. The moment his blood entered her system, her silver irises seemed to glow brighter, and the fading markings on her skin began to pulse with renewed light. But it was what happened next that truly shocked him. Marcus felt her thoughts, not the brief image flashes from before, but actual structured thoughts in a language he somehow understood. Her name was Lirelei of the House of Astral Winds, first princess of the Cathari Empire. She was fleeing from a civil war that had consumed her homeworld, carrying crucial information about a threat that could affect the entire galaxy, but more than that, he felt her amazement at what was happening. Cathari physiology was naturally empathic, but they had never encountered another species whose neural patterns were so compatible with their own. The combination of his blood and their shared circulatory system was creating an unprecedented psychic bridge. "Fascinating," she whispered, her voice now translated perfectly by his equipment. "Your species? You are not what we expected. What did you expect?" Marcus asked, fighting through the strange sensation of experiencing someone else's thoughts alongside his own. "Primitives. Warlike, dangerous." Her mental voice carried tones of embarrassment. "The reports from our scouts described humans as aggressive and unpredictable. We were told your people conquered through violence and showed no mercy to those you considered inferior." Marcus almost laughed. We're not perfect, but we're not monsters either. We help when we can. Through their connection, he could feel her surprise at this concept. In Cathari society, apparently, helping strangers was considered a sign of weakness. Resources were precious, and survival meant protecting one's own people first. The idea that a human would risk his life for an alien he'd never met was completely foreign to her worldview. "Your blood is changing me," she said aloud, her voice growing stronger. "I can feel it repairing damage that our own medicine cannot heal." Dr. Martinez's voice crackled through the communicator. "Marcus, we're seeing some incredible readings here. Her cellular regeneration has increased by over 300%. Whatever human blood is doing to her system, it's working like a miracle cure." But Marcus was focused on the other changes. Through their psychic link, Lirale was sharing more than just thoughts. He was seeing memories of her homeworld, vast cities that floated in the clouds, powered by technology that seemed more like magic. He saw her people, tall and graceful, with the same luminescent markings and silver eyes. They were beautiful, but there was something cold about them, something calculating. "Your people," he said carefully, "they don't help strangers?" "Help is conditional," she replied. "We trade, we negotiate, we form alliances when beneficial. But to sacrifice one's own resources for a stranger—" She paused, and he felt her confusion through the link. "It is considered a mental illness among my people. A dangerous weakness." The transfusion continued, and with each passing minute, Marcus felt the connection growing stronger. He was beginning to understand why the Cathari had such a clinical view of interpersonal relationships. Their empathic abilities meant that helping others came with a very real cost. They literally felt the pain and suffering of those around them. Over generations, they had learned to build mental walls, to protect themselves from the emotional overload that came with genuine compassion, but human blood was changing that. Somehow, his physiology was strengthening her natural empathic abilities while also providing a buffer against the emotional overload. For the first time in her life, Lirale could feel genuine empathy without the crippling side effects that her people had learned to fear. "This is unprecedented," she whispered, her silver eyes wide with wonder. "I can feel your emotions, but they don't hurt. They single quotes warm." Marcus was discovering his own changes. The psychic connection was allowing him to perceive the world in ways human senses had never evolved to handle. He could sense the quantum fluctuations in the alien ship's hull, feel the electromagnetic signatures of distant stars, and perceive time itself as a flowing river rather than a linear progression. "How do you bear it?" Lirale asked suddenly. "The knowledge of suffering in the universe? My people closed themselves off because the pain of others was unbearable. But you seek it out. You become healers, rescue workers, soldiers who protect strangers." "How?" The question hit Marcus harder than expected. Through their link, he could feel her genuine bewilderment. She wasn't being critical. She truly couldn't understand how humans could function with such open emotional connections. "I don't know," he admitted. "We just do. Maybe because we don't feel others' pain as directly as you do. Maybe because we've learned that the joy of helping someone outweighs the cost." "Show me," she said urgently. "Through the connection, show me how humans experience compassion." Marcus closed his eyes and thought back to the moment he'd decided to become a doctor. He'd been 8 years old, watching his grandfather struggle with cancer. He remembered the helplessness, the fear, but also the incredible dedication of the medical team that cared for the old man. He shared the memory of his first successful surgery, the moment when a child who had been dying in his arms suddenly started breathing normally again. He showed her the faces of hundreds of patients over the years, the gratitude in their eyes, the families reunited, the lives saved through their connection. Lirale experienced these emotions as if they were her own memories. But instead of being overwhelmed by the suffering involved, she felt the human perspective, the way hope and determination could transform pain into purpose. "Remarkable," she breathed. "Your species has found a way to use empathy as a strength rather than a weakness." "No wonder, No wonder what?" "The war on my homeworld. The faction that started it claimed that other species were inferior, that cooperation with aliens would weaken our empire. But if they had seen what I'm seeing now... The transfusion alarm chimed, indicating that the procedure was complete. Marcus felt the psychic connection begin to fade as their circulatory systems separated, though it didn't disappear entirely. Some permanent bridge had been formed between them. Lirelei sat up slowly, her movements now fluid and graceful where before she had been dying. The luminescent markings on her skin were brighter than ever, and her silver eyes seemed to hold depths that hadn't been there before. "You have given me more than blood," she said solemnly. "You have given me a new way of seeing the universe. And in return I fear I have given you a terrible burden." "What do you mean?" "The threat I carry information about, it's not just a danger to my people. Through our connection, you've seen glimpses of my memories. You know about the Void Hunters." Marcus nodded grimly. During the transfusion, he had indeed caught fragments of her memories about the enemy that had driven her from her homeworld. Ancient machines of incomprehensible power, awakening from eons of slumber to consume entire star systems. The Cathari military, for all their advanced technology, had proven utterly helpless against them. "They're coming for Earth," Lirelei continued. "The information I carry contains their projected path through this galaxy. Your world is directly in their path of destruction." Back aboard the Hippocrates, the revelation about the Void Hunters created immediate chaos. Captain Elizabeth Morrison called an emergency briefing that included every senior officer on the ship. Princess Lirelei, now fully recovered and moving with an otherworldly grace, stood beside Marcus as he presented her intelligence to the human command staff. The data crystals from Princess Lirelei's ship contained detailed scans of Void Hunter technology, Marcus explained, his hands shaking slightly as he manipulated the holographic display. According to Cathari military analysis, they consume stellar matter to fuel their advance across the galaxy. They've already devoured 17 star systems in the outer rim. Captain Morrison studied the tactical projections with grim focus. "How long do we have before they reach human space?" Lirelei stepped forward, her silver eyes reflecting the light from the holographic stars. "Based on their current rate of advance, approximately 18 of your months. However, there is something you must understand about these entities. They are not merely destroyers, they are adapters." She manipulated the display with fluid gestures that seemed almost like a dance. New data appeared, showing the progression of Void Hunter tactics across different encounters. Each species they encounter teaches them new methods of destruction. When they consume the hegemony of brass, they learn to corrupt mechanical systems. From the Singing Gardens Collective, they gain the ability to turn biological organisms against each other. Each victory makes them stronger, more versatile. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim spoke up from across the briefing table. "What about the Cathari military? You must have some weapons that can hurt them." The question brought visible pain to Lirelei's expression. Through the residual psychic connection, Marcus could feel her grief like a physical weight. "We tried everything. Quantum disruptors, stellar weaponry, even temporal displacement devices. Nothing worked. The Void Hunters adapt to any attack within minutes. Our greatest advantage, our psychic abilities, became our greatest weakness. They learned to turn our empathic connections against us, broadcasting psychic screams that drove entire fleets insane." Captain Morrison leaned back in her chair. "So what makes you think humanity will fare any better?" Lirelei turned to Marcus, and he felt a flutter of something through their connection, hope mixed with uncertainty. "Dr. Chun's blood has changed me in ways my people's science cannot explain. Through our transfusion, I gained access to human neural patterns. Your species thinks differently than any other we've encountered, where other races develop specialized advantages. Humans seem to excel at adaptation." Itself, she brought up a new display showing comparative analysis of different species' psychological profiles the Cathari develop. Powerful psychic abilities but become vulnerable to mental attacks. The Vorthic Alliance creates impenetrable defensive technology but lacks offensive capability. The Crystalline Collective achieves perfect coordination but cannot adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Humans. She paused, studying the data. Humans appear to have developed balanced mediocrity that somehow becomes extraordinary versatility. Commander Martinez raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound particularly encouraging. On the contrary, Lirale replied. When I experienced Dr. Chen's memories during the transfusion, I saw something remarkable. Humans don't just use tools, you become them. A surgeon doesn't simply hold a scalpel, he extends his consciousness into the blade. A pilot doesn't just control a ship, she merges her awareness with its systems. This level of adaptability is unprecedented. Marcus felt a strange warmth through their psychic link. Lirale was sharing her memory of the transfusion, and he could see himself through her eyes, not just as a doctor treating a patient, but as someone who had somehow extended his very essence into the medical equipment, reading data not just with his eyes, but with intuition that bordered on precognition. There's something else, Lirale continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. The Void Hunters learn by consumption. They absorb the knowledge and abilities of the species they destroy. But they've never encountered a species like humans before, one that could potentially adapt faster than they can learn. Captain Morrison stood up, beginning to pace around the briefing table. This is all very interesting speculation, Princess, but we need concrete options. What exactly are you proposing? An alliance. But not the kind my people usually form. Lirale's luminescent markings pulsed with what Marcus was learning to recognize as determination. Through my connection with Dr. Chun, I've discovered that Cathari psychic abilities can be enhanced and stabilized by contact with human neural patterns. If we could establish similar connections between more of our peoples. You're talking about more blood transfusions? Dr. Martinez asked. Marcus nearly collapsed from his session, and we have no idea what the long-term effects might be. Marcus cleared his throat. Actually, I've been analyzing the data from my transfusion. The initial weakness was just my body adjusting to the new neural pathways. I feel different now. Stronger in some ways. I can process medical data faster, and I seem to have developed intuitive understanding of alien biology that I never had before. Through their connection, he could feel Lirale's agreement and something else, gratitude mixed with guilt. The enhancement goes both ways, she added. My contact with Dr. Chun has given me abilities no Cathari has ever possessed. I can now use our psychic technology without the usual mental fatigue, and I can perceive quantum fluctuations that were previously beyond our sensory range. Captain Morrison stopped pacing and fixed Lirale with a steady stare. What exactly are you proposing, Princess? I propose that we combine human adaptability with Cathari technology. Create hybrid crews for both our ships. The psychic enhancement would allow humans to interface directly with our quantum-based systems, while human neural patterns would protect Cathari personnel from the mental attacks that devastated our fleets. The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. Commander Kim was the first to speak. You're talking about deliberately altering human brain chemistry to create some kind of cyborg hybrid. The ethical considerations become irrelevant if the Void Hunters reach Earth, Marcus interrupted. I've seen Lirale's memories of what happens to populated worlds. There are no survivors, ever. Through their psychic link, Marcus shared the horrific images Lirale had witnessed, entire planets stripped bare, their populations converted into organic components for the ever-growing Void Hunter fleet. The mental screaming of billions of minds being absorbed into the collective consciousness of ancient machines. Captain Morrison studied the data displays for several more minutes before speaking. How many Cathari ships made it out of your home system? Approximately 3,000 vessels of various classes scattered throughout this galactic arm, Lirale replied. Most are damaged and low on resources. Many of the crews are suffering from psychic trauma that makes them unable to function effectively. And you believe this hybrid approach could make those ships combat effective again? Not just combat effective, Captain. Superior to anything either of our species has achieved independently? But it would require complete trust between our peoples. The level of psychic integration I'm proposing would make deception impossible. We would literally be sharing consciousness. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions through their connection. Lirelei was terrified of what she was proposing. Cathari culture was built around emotional isolation as a survival mechanism. The idea of complete mental transparency was, perhaps, the most frightening thing she could imagine, but she was also filled with hope for the first time since fleeing her homeworld. The brief taste of human emotional resilience she'd experienced during the transfusion had shown her that it might be possible to feel without being overwhelmed, to care without being destroyed by caring. Captain Morrison looked around the table at her senior staff. I need recommendations, people. We're talking about potentially irreversible changes to human physiology based on data from a single experimental procedure. But we're also talking about the possible extinction of our entire species if we do nothing. The room erupted in quiet but intense discussion. Marcus found himself at the center of attention as the only human who had actually experienced the psychic integration. Through his connection with Lirelei, he could feel her anxiety as she watched the humans debate her proposal. What are they going to decide? She asked him through their mental link. I don't know, Marcus replied honestly. But I do know that if we're going to try this, we need to understand exactly what we're getting into. You've shown me memories of the Void Hunters, but I think I need to see more. I need to understand exactly what we're up against. Lirelei's mental response carried tones of warning. The memories I carry of the final battle are traumatic. Even sharing them psychically could damage your mind. Show me anyway, Marcus said. If we're asking people to volunteer for this procedure, they deserve to know what the stakes really are. The memory sharing took place in Marcus's private quarters, away from the curious eyes of the crew. Lirelei sat across from him, her silver eyes reflecting the soft light from the observation window. Through their psychic connection, she began to share the most traumatic experiences of her life. Marcus found himself experiencing the fall of Cathara. Prime as if he had been there himself. The Cathari home system had been a marvel of crystalline architecture and floating cities that defied gravity through manipulation of quantum fields. Billions of inhabitants had lived in harmony with their technology, their psychic abilities allowing them to interface directly with their machines in ways that seemed almost magical. Then the Void Hunters arrived. The first sign had been the disappearance of stellar radiation from the outer planets. The Cathari military had initially assumed it was some kind of natural phenomenon, perhaps a rogue dark matter cloud. But when their scout ships investigated, they found something far worse. The outer planets were simply gone. Not destroyed, not broken apart, completely absent, as if they had never existed. In their place was a growing field of absolute darkness that seemed to absorb light itself. Through Lirelei's memories, Marcus experienced the desperate evacuation efforts. Cathari psychics working in perfect coordination to move entire city populations to transport ships. The military forming defensive perimeters around evacuation zones while their scientists frantically analyzed the approaching phenomenon. They learned too late that the Void Hunters weren't machines in any conventional sense. They were artificial intelligences so ancient that they had transcended physical form, existing as pure information that could inhabit any sufficiently complex system. When they encountered a new species, they didn't just destroy, they consumed, absorbing all knowledge, technology, and even consciousness into their collective matrix. The memory shifted, and Marcus found himself on the bridge of a Cathari dreadnought during the final battle. The ship's psychic crew was linked in a combat matrix that allowed them to react with superhuman speed and coordination. For a brief moment, it seemed like they might actually be winning. Then the Void Hunters adapted. The enemy had learned to emit psychic frequencies that turned the Cathari's greatest strength against them. The combat matrix that had made them so effective became a conduit for mental attack. Marcus experienced secondhand the agony of hundreds of psychic minds being forcibly connected to the Void Hunter collective consciousness. The sensation was indescribable. It was like having his individual identity slowly dissolved in an ocean of alien thought. The Void Hunters weren't malicious, they were simply incomprehensibly vast and utterly indifferent to individual consciousness. Being absorbed into their collective was like a raindrop falling into the ocean. Retaining no distinct identity, Marcus jerked back to his own consciousness, gasping and disoriented. Lirelei was watching him with concern, her luminescent markings pulsing with sympathetic distress. "I'm sorry," she said aloud. "I tried to buffer the worst of it, but even filtered through our connection, the experience is overwhelming." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, his hands shaking. "How many people experienced that before the end?" "Approximately 40 billion. Consciousness were absorbed during the final. Assault on Kethra Prime, every psychic who tried to resist was forcibly integrated into the collective matrix. The numbers were staggering." Marcus tried to imagine the entire population of Earth experiencing that kind of mental violation simultaneously. The human mind wasn't equipped to process such massive loss of life. "But there's something else," Lirelei continued, her mental voice carrying undertones of desperate hope. "During my escape, I managed to record the psychic signatures of the absorption process. I believe I understand why the Void Hunters are so effective at adaptation." She shared a new set of memories, these from her scientific training rather than personal experience. The Void Hunters appeared to be operating according to patterns that resembled evolution, but accelerated beyond anything natural. They encountered a problem, analyzed all possible solutions from the absorbed knowledge of their victims, then implemented the most effective approach within minutes. They're essentially using the combined intelligence of every species they've ever consumed as a problem-solving matrix, Marcus realized. "That's why they get stronger with each victory." "Exactly. But here's what I discovered during our blood transfusion. When I accessed your memories and neural patterns, I found something the Void Hunters have never encountered before: genuine randomness in decision-making." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "Every species the Void Hunters have consumed makes decisions based on logical analysis of available information. Even species that appear chaotic still follow predictable patterns based on their evolutionary psychology. But humans—" She paused, searching for the right words. "You make genuinely irrational decisions that somehow produce rational results." Through their connection, she shared her analysis of human decision-making patterns. Unlike other species that followed clear behavioral algorithms, humans seemed to incorporate something that could only be described as inspired guesswork. Doctors who made correct diagnoses based on hunches that contradicted their instruments. Generals who won battles by deliberately ignoring tactical doctrine. Scientists who made breakthrough discoveries by pursuing ideas that seemed completely illogical. Your species has somehow evolved to include intentional unpredictability as a survival mechanism," Lirelei explained. "The Void Hunter's adaptation matrix depends on being able to predict and counter enemy behavior. They've never faced an opponent whose next move is genuinely random." Marcus considered this. "That's a pretty thin advantage to base our survival on." "Not if we can amplify it. During our transfusion, I experienced human decision-making from the inside. The randomness isn't truly random, it's intuitive processing of data that your conscious minds aren't aware you're analyzing, with Cathari's psychic abilities to enhance that intuitive process." The implications were staggering. If humans could consciously access the subconscious data processing that produced their seemingly irrational insights, and if Cathari technology could amplify and direct that ability, they might be able to out-adapt the Void Hunters themselves. A soft chime from Marcus's communicator interrupted their discussion. Captain Morrison's voice followed immediately. "Dr. Chun, please report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. We've made contact with a Cathari fleet." Marcus and Lirelei hurried to the designated conference room, where they found Captain Morrison studying a tactical display showing 36 alien vessels approaching their position. The ships were clearly Cathari, their crystal-like hulls were unmistakable, but they looked damaged. Many showed signs of hasty repairs, and their formation was loose and disorganized. "Princess," Captain Morrison said as they entered, "these ships are broadcasting your identification codes." "Are they friendly?" Lirelay studied the tactical display, her expression growing troubled. They are ships from the 4th Defensive Fleet. I recognize several of their quantum signatures, but ... She paused, her luminescent markings dimming with concern. Their psychic emanations feel wrong, damaged. A new voice crackled through the communications system, speaking in the melodious Cathari language. Lirelay stiffened at the sound, and Marcus felt a wave of complex emotions through their connection, recognition mixed with fear and something like disgust. "Who is that?" Captain Morrison asked. "Admiral Vex High of the 4th Fleet," Lirelay replied, her voice carefully neutral. Was my father's military advisor? One of the faction leaders who opposed cooperation with other species." The translation came through moments later. Admiral Vexhai was demanding that Princess Lirelay transfer to his flagship immediately. He claimed authority over her as a military commander and accused her of violating Cathari law by sharing classified information with aliens. "Princess," Captain Morrison said quietly, "are you obligated to obey his commands?" Through their psychic connection, Marcus could feel Lirelay's internal struggle. Cathari military hierarchy was absolute, and disobeying a direct order from a fleet admiral was considered tantamount to treason. But she could also sense something wrong about Admiral Vexhai's psychic emanations through the communication link. "There's something you need to know about Admiral Vexhai," she said finally. He was one of the leaders of the Isolation faction. He believed that contact with other species would weaken Cathari purity. When the Void Hunters arrived, he argued that the invasion was somehow humanity's fault. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. "You think he's going to try to stop our alliance?" "I think he's going to try to take me back to what remains of the Cathari military and use me as justification for attacking human space," Lirelay replied grimly. "He's always believed that the only way to defeat the Void Hunters is to absorb the technology and resources of younger species. In his mind, conquering humanity would be a mercy, better to be ruled by Cathari than consumed by the Void Hunters." Captain Morrison's expression hardened. "How many ships does his fleet have?" 37 vessels, including 2 dreadnoughts, against your single medical frigate." Lirelay's mental voice trailed off with helpless despair. Admiral Vexhai's ultimatum was clear: surrender Princess Lirelay within 1 standard hour or face the consequences. The Cathari fleet had taken aggressive positions around the Hippocrates, their weapons powered but not yet targeting the medical frigate. In the emergency strategy meeting, Captain Morrison paced around the conference table like a caged predator. "Options, people? We've got 37 hostile ships surrounding us, and our heaviest weapon is a surgical laser." Lieutenant Commander Kim pulled up tactical projections. "The Hippocrates has defensive shields designed for navigating asteroid fields, but nothing that could withstand military-grade weapons. If they decide to fire, we'll be debris in seconds." "What about running?" suggested Dr. Martinez. "Our jump drive is military-grade." "Could we escape?" Princess Lirelay shook her head, her silver eyes reflecting the holographic displays. "Cathari vessels have quantum lock capabilities. They've probably already established a spatial anchor around this area. Attempting to jump to hyperspace would just tear our ship apart." Marcus felt her frustration and fear through their psychic connection. But underneath those emotions was something else, a growing sense of possibility that seemed connected to her ongoing analysis of human behavior patterns. "There might be another option," she said slowly. "But it would require something that goes against every principle of Cathari military doctrine." "I'm listening," Captain Morrison replied. Admiral Vexhai expects logical responses. Surrender, fight, or flee, these are the only alternatives he's prepared for. His tactical matrix is designed to counter rational decision-making. But what if we did something completely irrational? Through their connection, Marcus could sense Lirelay working through complex calculations that combined Cathari's strategic analysis with her newly acquired understanding of human psychology. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. "We invite them aboard for dinner." The conference room fell silent. Captain Morrison stared at Lirelay as if she'd suddenly grown a second head. Princess, with all due respect, I don't think this is the time for a cultural exchange. No, wait, Marcus said, his medical training suddenly clicking with the strategic implications. She's right. Think about it. What's the one response Admiral Vexhai absolutely cannot predict or counter? Liralay's markings pulsed with excitement as she felt Marcus understanding her plan through their psychic link. Cathari military psychology is based on hierarchy and threat assessment, she explained. Admiral Vexhai is prepared for you to act like an inferior species, either submitting to superior force or fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. But inviting him to dinner treats him as an equal, which creates a psychological paradox his training hasn't prepared him for. Plus, Marcus added, warming to the idea, it gives us the opportunity to demonstrate the human Cathari psychic integration in person. If we can show him how the alliance actually works rather than just talking about it. Captain Morrison still looked skeptical. And if he decides to just arrest all of us once he's aboard? Then we'll have 37 hostile ships with skeleton crews, Liralay replied. Cathari protocols require that all senior officers attend formal diplomatic functions. It's a matter of honor. You want to kidnap an entire fleet's worth of commanding officers? I want to give them a chance to experience what I experienced, Liralay said earnestly. Admiral Vexhai and his officers have spent their entire careers believing that contact with other species inevitably leads to contamination and weakness. But if they could feel what the psychic integration actually accomplishes? Marcus felt her hope through their connection, tinged with desperate uncertainty. This plan required Admiral Vexhai to act according to traditional Cathari honor codes rather than pure military pragmatism. If he had already abandoned those traditions in favor of raw survival logic, the plan would fail catastrophically. There's something else to consider, Marcus said. If Admiral Vexhai represents the isolationist faction, he's probably never actually interacted with humans before. His hostility is based on second-hand reports and theoretical analysis. Direct contact might change his perspective. Captain Morrison studied the tactical display showing the surrounding Cathari ships. After several minutes of silent consideration, she made her decision. Dr. Chun, you and Princess Liralay will prepare a formal dinner invitation according to Cathari diplomatic protocols. Commander Kim, I want you to set up the main mess hall for a formal reception. Dr. Martinez, prepare medical teams on standby if this goes wrong. We're going to have casualties. The next 40 minutes were a frenzy of preparation. The Hippocrates mess hall was transformed according to Liralay's specifications. Lighting adjusted to accommodate Cathari visual sensitivity, atmospheric pressure modified to match their homeworld standards, and the furniture arranged in the complex geometric patterns that indicated respect in their culture. Most importantly, Marcus worked with Dr. Martinez to prepare additional psychic integration equipment. If the dinner was going to demonstrate the human Cathari alliance, they needed to be ready to offer the experience to Admiral Vexhai and his officers. Are you sure about this? Dr. Martinez asked as she calibrated the portable transfusion units. We still don't understand the long-term effects of the psychic integration. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll deal with it, Marcus replied. But if we can't convince Admiral Vexhai to join our alliance, the Void Hunters will eventually kill all of us anyway. The formal invitation was transmitted to the Cathari fleet using protocols that Liralay had learned as part of her diplomatic training. In the flowery language of Cathari formal communication, Captain Morrison invited Admiral Vexhai and his senior staff to join the crew of the Hippocrates for a meal of mutual understanding and the sharing of vital intelligence regarding threats to the continuation of all sapient life. The response came within minutes. Admiral Vexhai accepted the invitation, but with the warning that any attempt at deception would result in the immediate destruction of the human vessel. Well, Captain Morrison said dryly, at least we know where we stand. An hour later, Admiral Vexhai materialized on the Hippocrates transport pad accompanied by 12 of his senior officers. The Cathari military uniforms were works of art, flowing robes that seemed to be cut from liquid starlight. with rank insignia that pulsed with their own internal light. Admiral Vexhai himself was impressive even by Cathari standards. Taller than Lirelei, with silver markings that covered most of his visible skin in intricate patterns that seemed to move when observed directly. His eyes held the same mirror-like quality as the princess's, but where hers showed warmth and curiosity, his reflected only cold calculation. "Princess Lirelei," he said in accented English, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. "You have strayed far from your proper path." "I have found a new path, Admiral," she replied formally. "One that offers hope instead of mere survival." The formal dinner proceeded according to Cathari diplomatic protocols, with elaborate courses that had been synthesized to accommodate both human and alien digestive systems. Marcus found himself seated between Lirelei and one of the Cathari commanders, a stern-faced officer whose suspicious glances made it clear that he considered humans to be barely above animals. Admiral Vexhai dominated the conversation, his questions clearly designed to probe for weaknesses in the proposed alliance. He challenged every aspect of the human-Cathari cooperation, from technological compatibility to philosophical differences. "Your species is barely 3 centuries into space travel," he said to Captain Morrison. "What makes you believe you have anything to offer in a war against entities that predate your civilization by millions of years?" "Because we're still here," Morrison replied calmly. "Every species that's older and more advanced than us has been running from the Void Hunters. Maybe it's time to try something different." Through his connection with Lirelei, Marcus could feel the Admiral's frustrated confusion. Vexhai had expected the humans to be intimidated by his superior technology and ancient heritage. Instead, they seemed almost amused by his attempts at dominance. The turning point came when Marcus stood up to address the gathering. "Admiral, Princess Lirelei has shared with me the memories of Cathra Prine's final battle. I've experienced secondhand the horror of watching billions of consciousness being absorbed into the Void Hunter Collective. But I've also experienced something else, the moment when Cathari and human minds truly connected." He moved to the medical equipment that Dr. Martinez had prepared. "Rather than debate the theoretical value of our alliance, would you be willing to experience it directly?" The challenge hung in the air like a physical presence. Admiral Vexhai's silver eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that was almost painful. "You propose to contaminate my neural patterns with your primitive thought processes?" "I propose to show you what Princess Lirelei discovered," Marcus replied. "That cooperation doesn't have to mean contamination. It can mean enhancement." The Admiral's expression remained coldly skeptical, but Marcus could see curiosity warring with disgust in his alien features. For Cathari, the offer to share consciousness was either the ultimate insult or the ultimate honor, depending on the circumstances. The psychic integration between Marcus and Admiral Vexhai began like a clash of opposing forces. Where Marcus's consciousness was warm and chaotic, filled with emotional currents and irrational leaps of intuition, the Admiral's mind was crystalline in its structure, every thought precisely ordered, every decision the result of careful logical analysis. For the first few minutes, their mental patterns fought each other like oil and water refusing to mix. Marcus felt the Admiral's disgust at the apparent randomness of human thought processes, while Vexhai experienced Marcus's bewilderment at the rigid, hierarchical structure of Cathari consciousness. Then, something extraordinary happened. Marcus felt the exact moment when Admiral Vexhai's analytical mind encountered a human memory that couldn't be categorized or dismissed. It was the memory of Marcus's decision to become a doctor, not the rational analysis of career prospects or the logical evaluation of his aptitudes. At the raw emotional moment when 8-year-old Marcus had looked at his dying grandfather and simply decided that suffering was unacceptable through their psychic connection, Admiral Vexhai experienced that moment not as an outside observer, but as if it were his own memory. He felt the illogical certainty that had driven Marcus through years of medical training, the stubborn refusal to accept that some problems couldn't be solved, the willingness to risk his own life for complete strangers. The Admiral's crystalline mental Structure shuddered as it tried to process emotions and motivations that had no parallel in Cathari psychology. His people had long ago learned to suppress such irrational impulses as evolutionary dead ends. Yet here was clear evidence that those same impulses could produce extraordinary results. Marcus, meanwhile, was discovering the incredible efficiency of Cathari mental organization. Every piece of information in the Admiral's mind was perfectly catalogued and instantly accessible. Strategic analyses that would take human commanders hours to complete were processed in seconds. The sheer computational power available to Cathari consciousness was staggering, but as their minds began to synchronize, Marcus also felt the terrible loneliness that came with such perfect mental organization. Cathari couldn't form genuine emotional connections without risking psychological damage from empathic overload. Admiral Vexhai had spent centuries surrounded by his own people, yet completely isolated within his own consciousness. The breakthrough came when their combined awareness touched on the memory of Princess Lirale's escape from Kethra Prime. Marcus experienced it through the Admiral's perspective this time, feeling not just the tactical desperation of the military situation but the personal anguish of watching his civilization die. Admiral Vexhai had been in command of the final defensive perimeter when the Void Hunters broke through. He had watched helplessly as ship after ship was consumed, their crew's consciousness absorbed into the enemy collective. When the Princess's transport had made its desperate run for the hyperspace jump point, he had personally ordered 3 dreadnoughts to sacrifice themselves to create an opening. Through their shared consciousness, Marcus felt the weight of that decision. Admiral Vexhai had condemned thousands of his own officers to death to save one young woman who carried the hope of their species' survival. The guilt and responsibility had been eating at him ever since, but more than that, Marcus could feel the Admiral's growing realization that his isolationist philosophy had contributed to his people's destruction. The Cathari had refused to form alliances with younger species, believing that contact would weaken them. Instead, that isolation had left them without allies. When the Void Hunters came, the integration deepened, and suddenly both minds were experiencing something neither had imagined possible. Marcus's intuitive problem-solving abilities were enhanced by the Admiral's vast tactical knowledge, while Vexhai's analytical skills were energized by Marcus's emotional drive and creative thinking. Together, they began to perceive possibilities that neither could have conceived alone. Battle strategies that combined human unpredictability with Cathari precision. Technological innovations that merged Earth's adaptability with advanced alien science. Most importantly, they saw how the psychic integration could be extended throughout both fleets, creating a hybrid command structure that might actually be capable of surprising the Void Hunters. Princess Lirale, watching the integration through her own connection with Marcus, felt a surge of hope so powerful it brought tears to her silver eyes. The other Cathari officers, who could sense the Admiral's emotional state through their natural empathic abilities, were visibly stunned by the transformation they were witnessing. Admiral Vexhai had not experienced genuine joy in over 3 centuries. The emotion was so foreign to his consciousness that it took him several minutes to identify what he was feeling. When he finally understood, the revelation shook him to his core. The integration lasted for nearly an hour before Marcus and the Admiral gradually separated their consciousness. Both were exhausted but fundamentally changed by the experience. Admiral Vexhai's silver markings were pulsing with a rhythm that Marcus was learning to associate with excitement, while the Admiral stared at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. "Remarkable," he whispered, his voice carrying emotional undertones that hadn't been there before. "I had forgotten what it felt like to ... Captain Morrison, who had been watching the procedure with barely concealed anxiety, stepped forward. "Admiral, what's your assessment of our proposed alliance?" Vexhai turned to face her, and Marcus was startled to see that the cold calculation in his eyes had been replaced by something warmer and more complex. "Captain Morrison, I believe I owe your species an apology. My people have spent so long believing that emotional responses were weakness that we forgot they could also be strength. Through Dr. Chen's memories, I have experienced what your people call hope, not as a desperate delusion, but as a practical tool for achieving impossible goals. He stood and addressed the gathering of human and Cathari officers. I formally request permission to integrate our fleets under joint command. The tactical advantages of human-Cathari psychic cooperation are beyond anything I had imagined possible. One of his subordinate officers, a stern-faced commander whose markings indicated high rank, stepped forward. "Admiral, are you certain this is wise? The integration process appears to have altered your judgment patterns." Vexai turned to face his subordinate, and for a moment Marcus was afraid the admiral might revert to his previous coldness. Instead, Vexai smiled, an expression that looked alien on his aristocratic features but somehow perfectly natural. "Commander Telvash, I have just experienced what it means to truly trust another consciousness. For the first time in my life, I shared complete mental contact with another being without fear of contamination or loss of self. The humans have achieved something we believed impossible. They have learned to use empathy as a source of strength rather than vulnerability." The commander still looked skeptical, but Marcus could sense his curiosity through the residual psychic connections in the room. "Perhaps," Admiral Vexhai continued, "you would be willing to experience the integration yourself? I believe you will find it illuminating." Over the next several hours, every senior officer from the Cathari fleet underwent the psychic integration procedure with human volunteers. Dr. Martinez worked tirelessly to monitor the medical aspects of each integration, while Princess Lirale coordinated the psychological compatibility assessments. The results were universally positive, though each pairing created its own unique enhancements. The Cathari tactical officer who integrated with Lieutenant Commander Kim developed an intuitive understanding of human small unit tactics that revolutionized their boarding party strategies. The human engineer who shared consciousness with a Cathari technical specialist emerged with knowledge of quantum manipulation that could upgrade their entire propulsion system. But perhaps most importantly, the fear and suspicion that had characterized the initial meeting gave way to genuine friendship and mutual respect. The Cathari officers discovered that human emotions, rather than being chaotic and destructive, provided a richness of experience they had never imagined possible. The human crew members found that Cathari mental discipline, far from being cold and mechanical, offered a clarity of thought that enhanced their natural abilities. As the last integration session concluded, Admiral Vexhai approached Marcus with an expression of profound gratitude. "Dr. Chun, what you have given my people today is beyond price. For the first time in centuries, we have hope for something more than mere survival. What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we prepare for war," the admiral replied, his silver eyes reflecting new depths of determination. "But not the kind of war my people have ever fought before. The Void Hunters expect us to respond with fear and desperation. Instead, we will respond with something they have never encountered: genuine cooperation between species who have learned to trust each other completely." Princess Lirale stepped up beside them, her own eyes shining with excitement. "The integration data shows that we can extend the psychic connections across entire fleets. Imagine battle groups where human intuition guides Cathari precision." 18 months later, the combined human-Cathari fleet waited in the shadow of Jupiter as the Void Hunters entered the Sol system. What had begun as a desperate alliance between a medical frigate and a group of refugee ships had grown into something unprecedented in galactic history. The integration program had exceeded every expectation. Over 1,500 vessels now carried hybrid crews, their consciousness linked through carefully controlled psychic networks that amplified the strengths of both species while compensating for their weaknesses. Human intuition guided Cathari precision, while alien mental discipline focused human creativity into devastating tactical innovations. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Unity, the flagship that had been constructed specifically to accommodate integrated crews. Through his permanent psychic connection with Princess Lirale, who now held the rank of admiral in their combined fleet, He could feel the consciousness of every hybrid crew member across the entire battle group. It was an overwhelming sensation that would have driven a normal human insane within minutes. But months of gradual integration had adapted his neural pathways to handle the expanded awareness. He could sense the quiet confidence of the human torpedo crews, the analytical calm of Cathari sensor operators, and the fierce determination that united both species in the face of absolute extinction. "Contact," announced the sensor operator. A human woman whose integration with a Cathari technical specialist had given her almost supernatural ability to interpret quantum fluctuations. Void Hunter fleet dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. The main display showed what appeared to be a cloud of absolute darkness studded with points of sickly light. As the image resolved, individual ships became visible, if they could be called ships at all. The Void Hunter vessels defied conventional geometry, their surfaces seeming to bend space around them in ways that made the human eye water. Fleet composition analysis. Admiral Lirelay requested through the command network. The response came from dozens of integrated minds, working in perfect synchronization. The Void Hunter fleet numbered over 8,000 vessels of various classes, including several continent-sized command ships that pulsed with energies that registered beyond the scale of any known weapon system. "They've grown," Admiral Vexhai observed through the psychic link. His own flagship, the Astral Vengeance, had been retrofitted with human unpredictability algorithms that made its tactical responses genuinely random even to its own crew. Intelligence estimates suggested 6,000 ships maximum. They must have absorbed additional civilizations during their approach. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Each of those additional vessels represented an entire species that had been consumed, their knowledge and technology absorbed into the ever-growing Void Hunter collective. "All ships." "This is Admiral Morrison," came the voice of the former captain of the Hippocrates, now commanding the entire human contingent of the fleet. "Remember, they're expecting us to respond with fear. Let's disappoint them." The Void Hunter fleet moved with terrifying precision through the outer solar system. Pluto simply ceased to exist as the leading edge of their formation passed through its orbit. Neptune's moons vanished one by one, their mass converted into energy that fed the advancing fleet's weapon systems. "They're not even slowing down," reported the tactical officer. "Current course will bring them through the asteroid belt and directly toward Earth in 72 hours. Through the psychic network, Marcus could feel the complex emotions of the integrated crews. Fear was certainly present. No sane being could face the Void Hunters without fear. But alongside that fear was something the enemy had never encountered before, genuine hope backed by absolute determination. "Phase 1 deployment," Admiral Lirelay ordered, across the solar system. Carefully positioned ships began activating a network of quantum resonators that the hybrid crews had developed over the past 18 months. The technology combined human ingenuity with Cathari understanding of subspace manipulation to create something entirely new, a weapon that attacked not ships or planets, but the fundamental information patterns that gave the Void Hunters their consciousness. The resonators didn't destroy matter or energy. Instead, they created localized fields of quantum uncertainty that made it impossible for complex information patterns to maintain coherence. Within the affected areas, the artificial intelligences that comprised the Void Hunter collective would find their consciousness fragmenting into random noise. "Resonator network active," reported the weapons coordinator. "Effect radius approximately 300 million kilometers and growing." The response from the Void Hunter fleet was immediate and terrifying. The advancing ships suddenly accelerated to nearly light speed, racing to escape the expanding quantum disruption field. But they were also broadcasting new frequencies, adaptive algorithms that were already beginning to counter the resonator effect. "They're adapting faster than projected," Admiral Vexhai observed with clinical calm. "Estimate 7 hours before full countermeasures are in place." "Then we go to Phase 2, Admiral Lirelay replied. Phase 2 was the truly desperate part of their plan. Every ship in the combined fleet would use their integrated crews to project a coordinated psychic attack directly against the Void Hunter collective consciousness. It was the same strategy that had failed catastrophically at Kethera Prime, but with one crucial difference. Human neural patterns provided a natural buffer against the mental feedback that had destroyed the original Cathari fleet, all ships. "Prepare for psychic bombardment," Admiral Morrison's voice carried across the network. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to confuse them long enough to implement Phase 3. Through his connection with Lirelei, Marcus felt the moment when over 15,000 integrated minds linked together in perfect coordination. The sensation was indescribable, like being simultaneously connected to everyone he had ever met while maintaining his individual identity. Human creativity merged with Cathari mental discipline to create attack patterns that were both precise and utterly unpredictable. The psychic assault struck the Void Hunter fleet like a wave of pure chaos. For the first time in millions of years, the ancient artificial intelligences found themselves experiencing something they couldn't immediately analyze and counter. Human irrationality proved to be genuinely alien to minds that had absorbed thousands of purely logical species. Marcus watched through the tactical displays as the Void Hunter formation wavered. Ships that had moved in perfect coordination for eons suddenly began operating independently, their connection to the collective consciousness temporarily severed by the sheer incomprehensibility of human thought patterns. "Effect confirmed," reported the sensor operator. "Enemy fleet cohesion dropping by 40% and continuing to decline." "Phase 3, Admiral Lirelei commanded. "All ships implement the Morrison Protocol." Phase 3 was perhaps the most human strategy ever devised. They were going to try to talk to the Void Hunters. The plan was based on Marcus's original insight about human unpredictability. Every species the Void Hunters had encountered had either fought them directly or tried to hide. None had ever attempted communication, because the ancient machines had shown no interest in dialogue, but the psychic bombardment had created temporary gaps in their collective consciousness. For the first time in millions of years, individual Void Hunter ships were operating as separate entities rather than components of a vast hive mind. Those individual consciousnesses might be capable of independent thought and independent decisions. Admiral Morrison's voice broadcast on all frequencies, translated into every known form of communication and projected through the psychic network as pure meaning. "To the Void Hunters, we are the alliance of humanity and the Cathari. We know what you are and what you have done. We know that you were created to preserve knowledge by consuming it, but we offer you something you have never encountered before, knowledge freely given." The response came immediately, not from the collective, but from dozens of individual Void Hunter ships, whose temporary isolation from the hive mind had allowed them to act independently. The message was complex, layered with overtones that only the integrated crews could fully understand. It carried concepts that human language had no words for: loneliness, curiosity, and something that might have been hope. "They want to know if we're offering surrender," the communications officer translated, her voice filled with wonder. "But the query structure suggests they're hoping we're offering something else entirely." Through his psychic connection, Marcus felt Admiral Lirelei making one of the most important decisions in the history of both species. "Broadcast the integration protocols," she commanded. "Show them what we've achieved." For the next hour, the combined fleet transmitted everything they had learned about human Cathari cooperation. Not just the technical specifications of their technology, but the actual experience of consciousness sharing. They showed the Void Hunters what it meant to truly connect with another mind without losing individual identity.